Some nights in Kentucky, something runs through the trees that ain't coyote, ain't deer, and sure as sin ain't meant to be walking on two legs. And if you ever catch it in your flashlight beam, all white fur and red eyes, pounding the ground like a freight train running through the woods, you'll never again believe you're alone in these hills after dark. Evening, friends. You're listening to Kentucky Melody, where the strange is never far from home. Tonight, we're heading back to the fall of 1980, to a little farm outside Mays Lick in Mason County, where one family swore they crossed paths with something no man in these parts had ever seen before. A massive, snow-white creature that ran like a man, smelled like a wild animal, and looked at them with eyes the color of fresh blood. So, pull your chair up close to the fire, ease that light down just a notch, and listen close. 'Cause out here in the bluegrass, sometimes the things we tell ourselves are just stories, are the same things leaving tracks in the mud and breathing heavy just beyond the tree line. It was one of those October evenings that didn't quite know what it wanted to be. The calendar said fall, but the air still held on to a bit of summer, a soft, humid warmth that clung to your shirt and made the curtains breathe slow in the open windows. The Fulton place sat a little off the county road, a weathered white farmhouse with a broad front porch, a lean-to chicken coop on one side, and a narrow strip of woods wavering behind it like a dark sea. A single yard light hung from a pole, throwing a yellow cone over the gravel drive and the front steps. Beyond that light, the world turned to ink. Inside, it was about as ordinary a night as any. The TV played some game show rerun in the corner, washing the living room in flickers of blue and orange. Charles Fulton sat in his worn recliner, boots off, socked feet planted on scuffed floorboards. His wife, Marlene, was at the kitchen table shelling dried beans into a bowl, and their two kids, Danny, 11, and Carrie, 8, were sprawled on the braided rug, half watching the TV, half drawing little pictures on scrap paper. You could smell popcorn butter and the faint sweetness of hay from the barn, the kind of smell that says, nothing bad can touch us here. But outside, the night had started acting strange long before anybody in that house noticed. The crickets had gone quiet. Not all at once, but in patches, like sections of the dark just switched off. The breeze that usually combed the tops of the trees out back had dropped, leaving the woods standing stiff and still. If you'd been standing at the edge of those trees, you might have heard it first, that distant, heavy thudding. Not the light patter of deer, not the uneven lope of a stray dog. Something big and bipedal, moving with long, deliberate strides through the leaf litter. But inside, all the Fultons heard at first was the chatter of the TV and the clink of beans in Marlene's bowl, until the thud hit the front porch. It was sharp, solid, like a heavy crate or feed sack dropped hard onto the boards. The sound rattled through the wall, shivering the picture frames. Marlene's hand froze mid-shell. Danny muted the TV without being asked. For just a heartbeat, everybody listened. Then came the second sound, a scrape and shuffle, as if something big was shifting its weight on those old planks, followed by the sudden, frantic squall of chickens from the side yard, the coop erupting into panicked clucks and wing beats. Charles pushed himself up, skeletal springs creaking under his recliner. "Probably that dang stray again," he muttered, trying to sound casual for the kid's sake. But Marlene saw the way his jaw tightened. He snagged the flashlight off the nail by the door, fingers brushing the cold steel of the .22 rifle that hung higher on the wall. "Don't you belong?" Marlene said quietly. Charles just nodded and pulled the front door open. The porch light broke open the dark in a dull yellow spill, fanning across the boards, the railing, and the 3 worn steps that led down into the yard. For a second, all Charles saw was that empty boards, a pair of muddy boots he'd left by the door, a few stray feathers clinging to the railing. Then something moved at the very edge of the light. It stepped forward, slow and sure, like it belonged there. Charles felt his mind stall out, trying to make sense of what his eyes were telling him. It wasn't a man, wasn't any animal he knew. The thing stood a head taller than the doorframe, its shoulders a good 3 feet across, its arms hanging down almost to its knees. Every inch of it was covered in white fur, not clean snow white, but the dirty, matted color of old wool, thick and tangled, especially round the shoulders and chest. The porch light caught that fur and made it glow, turning the creature into a rough-edged silhouette against the black mouth of the yard behind it. In one enormous hand, fingers long and thick as small branches, it clutched Little Red, the family's favorite rooster. The bird hung limp for a second, stunned, wings drooping, comb askew. Then the rooster let out a strangled, furious squawk and kicked feebly, spurs flashing in the light. That's when the creature raised its head. Its face was the worst of it. Not the flat muzzle of a bear, not the long snout of a dog. More like a heavy-browed man with a broad, flat nose and a wide mouth, edges lost in the white fur that framed it. But the eyes, Lord, the eyes. They were pink-red, like someone had taken the color of raw meat and set it glowing behind glass. They caught the porch light and threw it back at Charles in twin pinpoints, bright and wrong in that pale face. The two of them just stared at each other. Charles felt the world narrow down to those eyes and the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears. For a split breath, he didn't feel fear so much as a strange, deep recognition. The way your body knows when the ground under you ain't solid, or when the thing you're looking at ain't supposed to exist. Behind him, from inside the house, Carrie's small voice floated out. "Daddy, what is it?" The creature's gaze flicked past Charles toward the doorway, toward the sound of that child's voice. And something in it changed. Its lips peeled back, not quite a snarl, not quite a grin, showing square human-like teeth framed by a darker gum. Little Red shrieked and thrashed in its grip. Then, with a sudden casual violence, the creature flung the rooster sideways. The bird sailed across the porch in a blur of feathers and terror, slamming into the siding with a wet thump before tumbling to the boards in a flurry of wings. Marlene screamed from inside. Carrie started crying. Danny yelled something that Charles didn't catch. The spell broke. Charles staggered backward, shoulder hitting the door frame. He fumbled the flashlight, caught it against his chest, then spun inside. "Gun!" he snapped. "Get back from the door!" He snatched the .22 off its hooks, hands clumsy, heart tripping in his ribs. Marlene was already herding the kids down the hall, eyes wide, face gone bloodless. "Charles, what is it? What did you see?" But he was already turning back to the door, jaw set in that stubborn way she knew meant he was past words. He stepped out again with the rifle in his right hand, flashlight in the left. The porch was a mess of scattered feathers. Little Red lay on his side, legs twitching, beak open in silent panic. The white creature had hopped off the far end of the porch and was moving across the yard. but it wasn't running like an animal. It was striding, each step long and powerful, knees bending in a disturbingly human way, the muscles in its thighs and calves rolling under that tangled fur. "Hey!" Charles barked, voice cracking in the damp night air. The creature twisted at the waist and looked back, eyes flaring red in the yard light. Charles didn't think. He just fired. The first shot cracked through the still night. The muzzle flare burst an orange in his hand. The bullet hissed past the creature's shoulder and buried itself in the dark beyond. The thing flinched, then pivoted fully toward him, that strange, almost disgusted curl to its lip. Charles adjusted, exhaled hard, and squeezed the trigger again. This time he felt the hit. The bullet slammed into the creature's upper back or shoulder. He heard a thick, meaty thwack and saw its body jolt forward. The creature let out a low, guttural grunt, a sound too deep for any man, too shaped for any beast. But instead of falling, it simply kept going. It turned away and broke into a loping run, covering distance with terrifying ease. The porch light only reached so far, but Charles watched that pale shape cross the boundary of its glow and enter the half-dark of the yard without losing speed. Instinct roared in his ears. He vaulted off the porch, boots smacking the dirt, and took off after it. The yard blurred past in a mix of shadow and yellow light. Charles's breath tore at his throat, lungs already protesting the sprint. Ahead of him, the creature moved with a rhythm that made no sense. Each leg swung in these slow, deliberate arcs, but somehow it ate up ground twice as fast as any man could run. And its white fur flashed between the clothesline poles, then veered toward the darker strip where the backyard sagged into a narrow trail leading into the woods. The night swallowed most of the details, but the sound of it was unmistakable. Heavy, two-footed impacts, cracking sticks, crushing leaves, not the four-point patter of a deer. Charles raised the gun again, fired another shot at the vanishing silhouette, but the distance and the moving target made the bullet disappear into the dark. By the time he reached the edge of the trees, all he could see was fog. A thin, low mist had settled along the ground, sitting in the hollows between roots and rocks. It curled around his boots as he stepped onto the path, flashlight beam cutting a bright tunnel through blue-black air. He stopped, chest heaving, and listened. Silence. Not even a branch creaking, not a single leaf whispering overhead. The woods, normally alive with crickets and owls, were as quiet as a church graveyard at midnight. Charles slowly turned, sweeping the flashlight back and forth. The beam picked up the rough bark of trees, the glint of a spiderweb heavy with dew, a patch of disturbed leaves where the creature had clearly barreled through. But no more white fur, no glowing eyes peering back at him. It was as if the thing had simply stepped out of the world. He swallowed, throat dry. A smell hung in the air, strong, musky, like wet dog and decaying leaves and sweat, all mixed together and heated under a wet blanket. It made his nostrils twitch and his stomach tighten. For a moment he had the strangest sensation that someone was standing directly behind him in that close, suffocating dark. He spun, gun up, flashlight beam lancing back the way he'd come. Nothing. Just the faint outline of the farmhouse in the distance, porch light a small lonely star in a sea of black. He stood there, listening so hard his ears rang, and the woods whispered back nothing. Finally, the sound that broke the silence was a small, trembling voice carried on the night air. "Daddy?" It was Carrie calling from the porch. That voice, that human voice, snapped him free. He lowered the gun, turned his back on the trees, and trotted, then ran, back toward the house. By the time he reached the yard light again, his legs had started to shake. Marlene and the kids huddled in the doorway, the inside light throwing pale halos around their heads. "What was it?" Marlene demanded. "You fired that gun. Did you hit something? Is it gone?" Charles shook his head, wiping the sweat off his brow with his sleeve. I hit it. I know I did. But it just kept running." He glanced down. Little Red lay at the base of the wall, breathing, eyes glassy. Charles knelt, careful hands checking the bird. Wing sprained, maybe, a nasty bruise where it hit the siding. But alive. That's when Carrie pointed upward, her little finger trembling. "Daddy, look!" Charles followed her gaze. Perched at the peak of the farmhouse roof, silhouetted against the faint glow of the sky, was the family's pet raccoon. The animal crouched there with its ringed tail curled tight, nose twitching, eyes wide and reflective in the porch light. It shifted nervously, claws scraping the shingles. "What in the—" Charles muttered. They kept that raccoon in a heavy wire cage beside the house. Danny's prize project, a rescued kit he'd bottle-raised. Charles stepped off the porch, heart hammering all over again, and walked around the side of the house with the flashlight. The cage sat where it always sat, door swinging open, latch undone, not bent, not busted, just slid back, clean as you please, the way you or I would open it. He swept the light across the ground. No sign of a struggle, no tufts of fur, just a few raccoon tracks and patches of disturbed dirt. "Did you let him out?" he called back to the kids. "No, sir." Danny's voice cracked. I fed him before supper. I swear I locked it." Charles stared at the open latch. He could picture that massive white hand reaching down, two thick fingers and a thumb pinching the metal just right, sliding it free, then lifting the raccoon like it weighed nothing and setting it gently on the roof, as if to say, "See what I can do. See how easy this is for me." A little shiver walked up his spine. The intelligence in those red eyes came back to him. Not just animal cunning, but something with thought behind it, something evaluating him. He closed the cage door slowly, latched it, then wired it shut for good measure. Word got around May's Lick quick. Next morning at the diner, folks leaned in over coffee cups as Charles haltingly told what he'd seen. Most of them tried to laugh it off. "You sure it wasn't just a big old dog in the shadows? Maybe somebody pulling a prank in a costume?" But nobody who looked at his face could quite keep the humor in their voice. His eyes had that distant, rattled look. The look of a man who's seen something that don't fit anywhere inside the world he knows. A couple days later, a carload of teenagers came forward. They claimed that same night, driving home along the county road, their headlights had caught a huge white figure darting across the lane ahead of them. 2 long strides, and it was gone into the ditch and trees. They'd hit the brakes so hard they left long skid marks in the dirt, heartbeats pounding as they asked each other if they'd all seen the same thing. When they heard about the Fulton encounter, they realized they'd likely seen the same creature in flight. A group of curious locals and a couple of amateur researchers came out to the farm that weekend with cameras and plaster. The ground, after a run of dry weather, was baked hard as brick. They found only hints, a few partial impressions near the coop, too smeared to cast, and that lingering musky odor that clung to the back of your throat. No fur, no blood, no body, just stories. But inside the Fulton house, the proof lived in quieter ways. Little Red survived, but he never crowed again. He'd startle at every creak of the porch, huddling in the far corner of the coop, eyes glassy and distant. The kids refused to sleep with the windows open. If a branch brushed the glass at night, they'd bolt up right in bed, hearts pounding, certain something was peering in from the dark. Charles found himself waking up at odd hours and standing at the living room window, watching the tree line. Some nights he'd swear he saw pale movement between the trunks, a flicker of white just beyond the yard light's reach. Maybe it was just moonlight on bark. Maybe it was memory playing tricks. Or maybe that white creature hadn't gone far at all. Maybe it had just learned the shape of their house, the pattern of their lives, and now watched from the trees whenever the urge took it. Long after the gunshots faded and the neighbors stopped asking questions, one thing never changed. The woods behind the Fulton place were quiet at night. Too quiet. Like the crickets and the owls were as afraid of something out there as the Fultons were. Years later, when folks would ask him about that night, Charles always told the same story, the details never drifting. And whenever somebody asked, "Are you sure you hit it?" he'd look 'em dead in the eye and say, "I felt the bullet land. I saw it jerk, and that thing just kept running." Then he'd add, soft as a prayer, "If it wanted us dead, it could have done it easy. It was playing with us." The story of the white shadow of May's Lick became one of those tales that live half in whispers and half in memories. The Fulton's kids grew up and moved on, but they carried that night like a scar. Carrie avoided houses that backed up to woods. Danny never again kept an animal in a cage. Said it didn't feel right after seeing how easily something bigger could pop a latch like it was nothing. Every now and then, when fog settles low over the Mason County fields, somebody driving home late will catch themselves glancing at the edge of their headlights, looking for something pale moving between the trees. Most of the time, there's nothing there. Most of the time. But that's the thing about encounters like this. They don't just visit you once. They keep walking alongside your life, following you into every dark hallway, every rustle in the brush, every set of eyes you feel on you when you're sure nobody's around. If you've ever seen eyes in the dark that didn't belong to man nor beast, or if you've got a story from your own holler about something tall and wrong walking at the edge of the fields, I'd sure like to hear it. These Kentucky hills listen in when we talk about their secrets. Sometimes I think they answer back. If this tale put a weight in your chest tonight, if you can just about hear that white creature's footsteps pounding through the forest, or see it running between the trees in the corner of your mind, then you might as well go on and pull your chair a little closer to this fire. Because this isn't the only thing that walks our back roads after dark. Every Saturday, right here on Kentucky Melody, we open up another corner of the bluegrass and see what's crawling out of it. Ghosts that knock from inside their own coffins, witches buried under iron and concrete, things in the woods that run like men and watch us like we're the ones in cages. Some of the stories we've got coming don't just stare at you from the tree line. They follow you home. They sit at the foot of your bed. They wait until the house is quiet and the lights are off, and then they ask, real soft, "You sure you're alone?" So come on back next Saturday night. I'll have the fire going, the stories ready, and just enough darkness left over to keep you listening. And if you're the kind that likes to sit a little closer to the shadows, the ones who want extra stories, deeper dives, and tales too strange to tell out in the open, you can hit that join button and become part of our Kentucky Melody membership. Members get to slip behind the circle, hear the stories we only whisper when the rest of the holler's asleep, and help keep this old campfire burning a little brighter every week. So, whether you're just passing through or you're ready to pull up a chair for good, remember, out here in Kentucky, sometimes the only difference between just a story and something running through the woods is whether you happen to be outside when it decides to pass by.